Thanks so much for taking the time. Maybe you can begin with a brief introduction to Between the Temples for people who don't know anything about your film. What can they expect when they dive in?
It's a kind of modern take on a screwball comedy starring Jason Schwartzman and Carol Kane. Jason Schwartzman plays a cantor at a temple, the guy who sings, and Carol Kane is his elementary like music school teacher, and they run into each other at a bar, and she wants to get her bat mitzvah, her late in life bat mitzvah, and so insanity, love, and all sorts of things ensue.
And maybe you can talk us through the genesis of the project. What gave you the initial germ of the idea? I believe it was sort of rooted in the story that you found out about your mum, that she was, doing the course to do her own bar mitzvah, which I think took you by surprise to learn that and sort of evolved from there. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how the story came about.
Absolutely. I was shooting a documentary about my mother. She had been in a lot of my movies, and I cut her out of one, and she would not forgive me. So in order to make it up to her, I made a documentary about her. And while shooting that, we went to her temple, which she had recently joined, and I was filming her and found out she was taking a class so she could get her bat mitzvah, and I was shocked because she was very anti-religion when I was growing up. She'd grown up in a socialist household. My father found Hebrew school kind of boring, so never pushed me to go to temple or get my bar mitzvah. So it was like it was a nice surprise, I suppose, to find that she was doing something like this late in life, because it's always lovely to see people, shifting as they grow old, because I feel some people become very set in their ways. So I relayed this story to a friend and publicist Adam Kirsch at a party a few weeks later. I believe it was like around Tribeca, and he said that there's a movie there that we should do, like a riff on Harold and Maude, where the late life bat mitzvah character would fall in love with her cantor or rabbi. And so some years passed, and Adam Kirsch kept pushing me to do this, and eventually we found financing for development for me to write it. I roped in my collaborator, C. Mason Wells, and then we started in on this, trying to crack what this movie was actually about and making it into its own thing.
And maybe you can tell us a bit more about, how other films or other references maybe bled into the film, both in terms of the story, but the look and feel of it as well. And like you said, this kind of screwball comedy, Harold and Maude, but maybe any other films.
Absolutely. Chris and I just started looking at all these films where it's like an uptight character is being loosened by another character, like Bring Up Baby or Tony Erdman, which is like a modern update of that. And so we started just thinking about what we could bring to that. And I feel like also, of course, you have like the May December relationships, like in Ali Fear Eats the Soul being like a key movie for me in general. So we return to that, and how the family reacts so negatively to this romance taking place between these two characters who have such an age gap between them. So those were, I would say it's like The Graduate, The Heartbreak Kid, Harold and Maude, Ali Fears the Soul were the initial movies that we kept breaking down and seeing what we could take from these. Because I feel like it's always just like assembling pieces from other movies that give you ideas as to what you can do, and then it creates this whole new, like, it's this mutant that is the movie that you put out into the world. And then in terms of like the look and feel of the film, because Carol Kane's character she represents this kind of warm past. We wanted to shoot it on film, and we wanted it to have this like analog quality. And so I kept thinking about these movies, these Soviet movies from the 70s, specifically Getting to Know the Big Wide World by Kira Muratova, and how it's this very bleak landscape, but it feels so warm and inviting. And so we wanted to somehow approximate that look. And Sean Price Williams, my DP, helped us find the methods.
Coming to your amazing cast and right at the center of it, Jason and Carol. I mean, Jason Schwartzman, we've seen in so many sort of Wes Anderson films, and he does this sort of tragicomic sort of feel so well, and particularly this character. And it's not an easy line to tread because regardless of what he's doing, you always feel very endeared to him, even though he's quite sort of quirky. And then I guess setting him off against Carol. So how do you decide on those two for your central characters, and how did you make sure that they sort of built that right dynamic to bring across this relationship and as it develops in the film?
So the movie was written for Jason Schwartzman. We'd always wanted him, and I don't think we could have had a movie without him. And we didn't know who was going to play the character of Carla. And I had COVID. It was right after my wedding. I was on my honeymoon, had COVID, was in a feverish sleep, and suddenly I realized it needed to be Carol Kane. And I wrote to my producers and my co-writer, and everyone was like, duh, like, how did we not think of that? And so luckily she'd always wanted to work with Jason ever since Rushmore. And we got them on a Zoom together. And as soon as the boxes with their faces popped up and you know, they started in on this little like back and forth, I knew we had a movie. They did an instant rapport, and like the comic timing was impeccable. Like they just played off each other so well. So it was natural. And they're both such incredibly warm people, and they bring so much of that to their characters. And I think that they really brought themselves to this project. And I was so in such awe watching them perform throughout the whole process. It was, Jason he's a slapstick master. Like he just is always going for jokes. So I think that was a perfect counterpoint to who his depressed character is. He's always trying to cover up the sadness. And that really helped make the character someone bearable for us to engage with rather than just watch the sad sack on screen.
And I believe, sort of improvisation is also kind of like a key tenet of what you have in your film. So I just wondered, to what extent did that come into play with this film? And, was it a case, right, well, here's the script, working off that, then sometimes just letting the cameras keep rolling, and what stayed in, what got cut out, how did that work?
We worked off of a 40-page, what we call a scriptment. So it's not quite a treatment, not quite a script, somewhere in between. It kind of reads like a novella. All of the dialogue is suggested, but it's not like broken. It's not broken off and separated from the text itself. So you just read through it and you can imagine the movie. And I know that Jason, after reading it, he said he could actually picture a film for the first time in years, because it doesn't seem like such a crude blueprint. So it allows the actors, I think, to imagine who their characters are and what their characters might say. Of course, by the time we were shooting, Chris and I had scripted pages for them, but they were constantly improvising based on what was scripted. And some scenes it was immediately evident that we had to stick to what was on the page. Other scenes, it would go off in all sorts of crazy directions. And it was just as, it was immediately clear that was what we needed to do, and kind of, just navigating that and allowing that to occur over the course of 18 days. We had a tight shoot, but I feel like there's an energy that comes with improvisation. There's a certain kind of chaos that comes with it that this film needed, because that's at the heart of screwball comedy. So it seemed like it was, apropos.
And I thought the scene where that seemed particularly pertinent was, this sort of climactic scene around the table, the Shabbat meal, which I know is another element that you often have in your films, is like people sharing a meal together, and just sort of the way it's just jumping between all the characters, and it's so cleverly done. What was it like pulling off that scene, and why do you think that one in particular is very important?
That was a monster to shoot. We shot it over 2 nights. That was the only sequence we had 2 cameras for. I mean, we had one version that we'd written some weeks prior to production that the actors had read, and most of them, that was a version they wanted to see on screen. But then we had presented a new version a day or two before we shot the scene. Most of the actors did not like that new version, so we had to shoot both versions. And then we also shot another version that was like totally improvised, that was based on a suggestion from Jason. So it was an amalgamation of these three versions of the scene. And in the edit, John McGarry, our editor, realized that he could build like a 3-act structure and just use all the 3 separate scenes to build out the sequence. And it worked really beautifully. And there was also just a lot of it was a very hectic, chaotic shoot because no one knew what the scene actually was about because we're shooting different versions that were like radically different. So everyone was confused as to what was happening. So that actually fed into the energy that's on screen.
And why for you do you think sort of being around the dinner table is such a kind of, I don't know, like such a great thing to try and capture on camera? I don't know whether it's something about, the sort of ostensible formality, and everyone's sort of supposed to be behaving themselves. And then when there's so much emotion and drama simmering beneath the surface, and that was definitely one of the key moments. I felt like, the tension just building and building, and, that sense of awkwardness that you get as the audience really comes from that. So what do you think so interesting about that setting for you?
I feel like so many important things happen around a Jewish dinner table. So it felt like that we had to have like a big dinner scene in this movie. And it felt very reminiscent of calamitous dinners I had with my family as a kid, where it's like you're witnessing people arguing and laughing, and you have no idea what's going to happen next, if people are going to leave in tears or they're going to hug after. Like, so I wanted to get that kind of sentiment in there, something that it felt like what I grew up with.
And in fact, more broadly, the setting of the film itself and where it is, in this kind of like small town vibe, the sort of the Jewish traditions that are there, and the community, why is that setting so important and so particular to the film, and how does it aid in the storytelling?
Well, Judaism is about questioning. Basically, the more that because I myself, I did not go to temple, so I grew up culturally Jewish. Jewish humor was very important to me. Like Albert Brooks, Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, all those films were key for me as a kid, followed by like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm and so on and so forth. So I feel like for a character who's at a moment of crisis, which Jason's character is, as well as Carol's character, it seemed like the right setting. It seemed like the right backdrop for this, which is this religion where you're questioning everything at all times, everything in front of you. And that's like Talmud, like the Talmudic scholarship of everyday life, where you don't take anything at face value. And I felt like that was, so thematically it worked out. And I guess that's sometimes how movies come together. It's like you're not even aware that they're going to fit together so cleanly, but they do. It's like after all the mess of dreaming up these characters in these scenarios, they fit together somehow. It's not, you don't have to force those puzzle pieces together.
And I guess, what you were saying earlier about it being a very short shoot, shooting on film, what were some of the biggest challenges along the way? Maybe it was that dinner scene, or maybe there was another moment. And on the flip side, what was your favorite bit?
Well, I think every day is a challenge just because you have some scenes will go swimmingly, and then later in the day it'll be a total nightmare. You just have no sense of what's going to happen. I feel like after like post production, I kind of block out all the bad, and I'm just like left with like good to protect myself in some ways. But like it was a rather smooth shoot, I have to say. Everyone really got along. Like the crew and cast were really there because it was such a tight schedule, and a lot of the people I worked with are good friends. So it kind of, even when it was difficult, it was still a delight. I mean, luckily no one got COVID because it was at that time when there was constant testing and so on and so forth. So I think my lucky stars for that. Basically, this is also to answer the other side of the question, which is like, I feel like the whole shoot is actually like what I hold in my heart, because there's such a warmth when I look back at it, and being around these like generous actors like Carol Kane, Jason Schwartzman, Robert Smigel, Maddie Weinstein, like Dolly DeLeon, Caroline Aaron. Like it was kind of a joy. I feel like as my cinematographer says, I'm my best self when I'm on set, because I'm actually happy, even when it's chaotic, even when things are going terribly. I'm happy because it's like that's where I want to be. That's where I feel at home.
And in terms of what people can take away from the film, I mean, it is dealing with, that sense of depression, and the Jason characters has, dealing with loss, not knowing what to do next with your life. But, you come out at the end of it and you have this real sense of warmth and optimism. And, it feels like you have sort of faith in humanity and the importance of connection. So even though everyone in their lives, are so sort of skeptical of what's happening between them, it sort of wins you over as the audience by the time you get to the end of it. So what do you hope people will walk out the cinema feeling?
That there is, even if, no matter how bleak the reality in front of us is, we have to somehow have some ounce of hope. It's like faith in the absurd that things will improve. And human connection is essential, no matter how frustrating it can be. We need other people. And I think it's as simple as that. And that's what it comes down to. Jason's character needed Carol's character in order to get out of the rut he was in. Without her, he would still be flailing. I so rarely see movies that just feel like they're from the heart. So I'm trying to make those kinds of movies that have that sense of life to them, because I feel like the more movies, the more that art has that sensibility, maybe the more we can put that into life itself.
And also it seems to just celebrate kind of the messiness and the chaos that life can be and your relationships can be. And, it feels like no one's ever really getting on, or, things aren't landing, but that's also part of the beauty of life. And it's like not trying to make everything perfect and everything go smoothly, and just kind of reveling in that and enjoying other people's company, whether or not it's going smoothly or not.
Absolutely. And that speaks to my process too. I'm not like a dictatorial, like that's like that kind of directing doesn't interest me. I want people to be themselves, to expose themselves and their emotions, to be vulnerable on screen. So it's like the messiness of life is right there in the process itself. So it's also what the movie's trying to impart, I suppose.
And I know the film was at film festivals like the Berlinale, and now landing in UK cinemas. What does that mean to you? And how's the journey of the film been? How have you seen the audience responses so far?
Well, it's been very humbling. It's my so it premiered at Sundance, and it was my 14th time submitting something there, and to finally get in there and then to follow that up with the Berlinale, which I've always wanted to play, just massive for me. And I've never actually had proper distribution in the UK, so to come out in theaters is really big for me, because I've played a bunch. I played Edinburgh a few times and like had a wonderful reception for my films there, and always wondered how I could actually have them screened to wider audiences. So it's very, I'm extraordinarily grateful just that the movie's actually playing to people, and that they're, people are reacting very well to it. They're taking to it, which, means a lot to me.
And I know you've been incredibly prolific over your filmmaking career. What's coming next? What might you take away from this project and into your next one?
I want to make more movies like this, but on a slightly larger scale. So I'm trying to figure out how to navigate that. I have a few that should hopefully be shooting in the next couple of years. And yeah, I mean, I want more comedies. I want more heart. I want to make grand, lush, melodramatic comedies. I don't know. There's a world, I think, that wants that too. So I think, to have like real humans on screen is something that's essential now more than ever. So,
and do you feel like there is almost a bit of a gap, in terms of what is out there in the cinema landscape? And it feels great, the nostalgic feel of this film, and the fact that it's like we said, kind of celebrating something about the messiness of life, and this kind of, and this comedic edge that it has. Not everything has to be these big franchises and like on huge scale of production. You can actually tell really wonderful human stories like this one.
Yes, and that gives me hope, that alone. So I mean, like, I can't stand humorless movies. I can't stand humorless TV shows. I think everything in life is absurd, and there's always a bit of humor, a spark of humor there. And I think the absurdity of life, if we can show that on screen, then we're doing something right.
100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And can't wait for everyone else to see Between the Temples, and best of luck for your future projects as well.